Hey everybody, welcome back to the Thousand Words Show. My name is Matt Addington. I'm really glad that you stopped by here today. I do need to be really clear that, because I haven't up to this point, but there is the podcast version. You can shop around at your local discount podcast store to listen to it, but it also lives on YouTube where you get a chance to, unfortunately, maybe look at, my face the whole time, but a lot of the time guests and myself will share the images that we're talking about. I try to do my best at describing those, but it's a place where you can get a chance to see kind of what we're talking about as well. So I appreciate you stopping by. Check out, either of those places if you want to follow along. But we're super, super excited and grateful today to have Amy Harris along. She is Adventure Amy on adventure.amy on Instagram. And I've been a big fan for a long time and just really, really excited to have you join today and tell some stories about some images and just talk photography today.
Yeah, I'm great. I'm greatly honored to be here doing that.
Amy is based in Colorado, but has traveled the world, especially intensely the last couple of years, to some amazing places. And if you've checked out her Instagram feed at all, you've seen that she's been able to capture just beautiful, beautiful images of wildlife all over the world and tell great stories. And that's ultimately what I've wanted to do with this show. There are some other podcasts out there that I'm huge fans of. Amy has been on with Matthew Gailey, with all the guys on the formerly Wild and Exposed. She's also been on with Jen Ritchie, who has started a Wildlife Conversations podcast. So there's some great ones out there. Amy, I'm glad that you joined here. Tell us a little bit, though your fans and your followers have probably heard those stories again or heard it before. Tell us just a little bit about what got you started.
Probably say that moving to Colorado is mostly what got me started in that realm of really loving to photograph wildlife. I'd been, I love photography. I'd been photographing every time we would, do anything, photographing the people, photographing the moment. But when I moved from Texas to Colorado, we moved straight to the mountains. We lived in Granby, Colorado. I mean, it was like a whole new world to me, all the, the landscape, and I was so excited to see the animals, and I really wanted to see a moose. And so every time we would go out to the park, we would see elk or, we'd get to see moose, and I was so excited to see them. So, just down the way, after I decided to stop working in the school system, I thought, I really love taking photos so much, so maybe I'll just start a portrait business. And that kind of took off, and I did that for 8 years. And my kids hilariously introduced me to Instagram because they told me that Facebook was for old people. And so then just being on Instagram and what I'm interested in, I started seeing all these wildlife photos, and I thought, man, I need a better lens. This lens that I've been using all along is probably not the best lens. And so I bought a Tamron, 1/600, and I went out for my first elk rut and photographed, and I was like, oh my gosh, what have I been missing all this time? And hook line, I just thought, I really want to do this more often. And I just slowly faded out the people and, pursued just going out more intentionally and finding animals. And man, that's just really taken off and brought so many new adventures and new people to me.
Yeah, I think, for years, and if you go all the way back to, caveman times, people drew pictures and people have taken pictures to capture a moment in time that tells a story. That's ultimately like what got me started with even doing this show. It was during COVID, and I was just really longing to talk to people about images. And just, I look at my own images and I think about the story. I think about the people that brought me to that place, or whether it was just me alone and being able to be in creation and, quiet time with God, or all of the different things that go along with one frame. And over the course of time, that's been such a powerful thing in so many people's lives. And so I wanted to bring people into a conversation about that with other photographers and other people that can kind of appreciate some of the same things. What is it? And this is an interesting question that you kind of brought up, but the art of storytelling with wildlife. That's with the commercial clients that I'll work with, there's a story that the brand has that you are trying to tell that ultimately is helping them, sell more of whatever it is. With wildlife, what is it about wildlife and storytelling that kind of weave together for you that you try to achieve?
Yeah, I definitely think that is something that I have in the past couple years trying to pursue better and more of. When I first started photographing wildlife, I was on social media and I was seeing a lot of captures, and a lot of what works on social media is that really up close, really tight portrait, and I felt like initially that's what I was mostly capturing. And I think when I went to Alaska in 2022 is when I had that deep sense of like, I have gotten obviously plenty of great up close portraits of all of these bears. But there's also so much more going on here, so much more. And the landscape in Alaska is so big and beautiful. And this is where they call home, and this is where they live and they survive. And that just sort of prompted me to start really evaluating like how do you tell a story with wildlife, that all in the composition and in the lighting and the landscape? Does there have to be something that's unique going on? Or can it really just be, here's a photo that I took and here's what I felt, or here's what I learned? So I still think I'm pursuing that in a lot of ways, but I think there's plenty of stories to tell. And it doesn't have to be on some grand adventure. It can just be in your local park with a great horned owl that has a nest who's caring for her young. And there's so much that goes on. And I think one of the greatest things as a wildlife photographer is that you sometimes have put the research into those things, and you can follow a great horned owl who is nesting with her young and raising them until they've, fledged the nest. And there's so much to be told about that. And so I think I've tried to consider, well, how can I capture, if I'm going to, want to tell a story, how can I capture this in a way that I can tell a story? Obviously, that's kind of hard because as a photographer, you're also thinking a lot of things all simultaneously, all at once. And sometimes a moment will have passed and I'll think to myself, gosh, I should have done that differently, or I should have gone like maybe done a more grand scale. And, there's so many things that I evaluate along with that. But I think that's something that I'm working on and that I'm striving toward, because, even in my own home, I have a couple of prints. Well, I have more than a couple. I have about 4 or 5. And of all of those prints, only 2 of them are like the really close, uptight, portrait. And the others are, more of that grand scale, the landscape of where they live and all of the beautiful elements that they call home.
Yeah, I think that is such a, it's maybe not a struggle, but we shoot, and sometimes maybe, Instagram or social media is in the back of your head that you want something, or maybe it's man, I would love to have a cover image for this magazine, and you're constantly thinking portrait as tight as possible and as big a lens as possible. But I fight myself sometimes to like put the 400 millimeter away and pull out a 70 to 200, or pull out a 15 to 35 and try to capture the environmental portrait that is, big space, little animal, if you will. One of the questions I was going to ask you was about portraits that are hanging, or things that you've got hanging in your house. And it's interesting you brought that up because I don't have a ton of them in my house, but the largest one that I do have is, boy, is it 4 feet by 6 feet on canvas, of a cheetah in Africa. And it is small cheetah and massive Mara, because the moment was, and again, the story that goes with it, I'll show the image here, but this cheetah had lost all of her cubs in the previous 24 hours to when we spent a good portion of the day with her. And so she would climb up on these ant mounds and just kind of look and observe. And it made me think of all the thoughts that were going through her mind, like she, her purpose and all of those things, and it was taken from her. And at the same time, there were these ominous clouds coming in, and just this big, huge space. So got plenty of photos, the tight shots of that cheetah. But I think the one that made the most impact to me was just this great, big, huge space that she was in, and all of the feelings, the loneliness and the despair and the things that she was probably feeling. So that was probably the largest one, and maybe the most prominent one that I've got in my home. What would be, if you were to describe one of them, one of the questions I had for you is, what's the most prominent or largest print that you have of your own in your home?
At the moment, the largest print that I have in my home is 24 by 36. Um, I I'm scheduled to order 30 by 40 is the next one. We have some new spaces that we're building for a new house, and so that's going to allow me actually the opportunity to print maybe some newer, bigger things. But I have a basement, and going down the stairs is one of my nice uptight shots of such a really cool and unique bull elk in the aspens. It was one of the shots I was like super excited to get, and it turned out beautifully on print. But as you go down the stairs, it's nice and big, and makes kind of an impact as you're going down. So I haven't printed bigger than that yet for my own home, but
And not that you judge like by how big it is, how important it was, because the wheels spin on, oh, I'd love to print that. That would look really cool here. That would look really cool there. But honestly, like images that I look at every single day, whether it's on the wall or on a book sitting on the table, I'm just so intrigued by the stories. You talked about the elk rut and how that was maybe one of your first like aha moments. Taking a bigger lens, going on a dedicated kind of wildlife shoot. One of the images that you shared to kind of talk about today was an image of and I'm going to just pull it up here, an image of an elk kind of walking through the water. And I think I can almost figure out exactly where that is
of course.
from places that I've been. But the splashing water, like the elk is just kind of plowing down into the water, splashing up all over. The light is catching the water. Again, not the biggest, most famous elk probably if this is Estes Park area, but tell us like what's happening. Why does this image carry a special story for you?
I think mostly because I think as wildlife photographers, we forget really what an honor it is to spend a lot of time up close with these animals. And your classic, most of the time what you're seeing during the rut is the bugle, maybe the bull moving his cows around, and I always am hoping for something different and unique. And one of my other favorite images is a really nice bull elk, and he happened to cross in the lake that morning, and the light was beautiful, and it was just such a gorgeous morning. And I haven't had many moments like that since then. And this year I was lucky enough twice to be on this little stretch of the river and just really got to witness such great moments of this bull and all of his cows moving through the water and charging through the water. And that's just something unique. That's not just like, oh, I saw an elk and he's bugling in the field. I have lots of shots like that. And I think when I was looking through my shots this year, just something that is different, something that just a more storytelling image. Okay, he's going through the water and it's splashing up, and it may not have been like some crazy golden light, but the light was really pretty. And he's not the biggest, baddest bull elk, but he was talk about dynamic. Elk can be really dynamic in their body language and what they're doing, and he was putting on such a great show. And not only that, but the Rangers did a really terrific job managing the people and managing the distance. And we were pretty close to this guy, and we got such a wonderful show. So that image is like, man, that was such a great night. That was such a great day. It was such a gift. It's, so it's special to me.
Yeah. And I think that's the wonderful thing about all of, images all having a story. You can have an image that, might look like some tourist took it, but there's so much other stuff happening around you, whether it be the people you're with or the smells and the sounds and just all of the other things that led up to that, maybe that 1/1000th of a second that the frame was captured. All of the other stuff on both sides of it, I think, just carries so much meaning. And that's, again, why I just find myself so intrigued with, being able to tell the stories of, that particular bull, and he's splashing. There's a lot of elements to it that are really, really unique, but especially for you, that meant and captured a lot of emotions and a lot of story just for you in that moment. It's not, we don't all get to be Jason Loftus and have two massive bulls fighting in the water right behind us. So sometimes it's the more, everyday kind of stuff that we just have to love the stories.
Yeah.
I've heard you talk before about mule deer and just deer in general, and I think probably some from your Texas background and now Colorado background. You're probably around deer a lot, like I am. Another image that you shared is an image of a mule deer, and it looks like he might be kind of raking a tree, maybe raking some sage. Just talk a little bit about what's kind of happening with the mule deer.
I think too that's just another reflection of gratitude as a wildlife photographer that I get to be up close and personal with these deer during the rut. It's not just a portrait, he's not just standing there. He's taking a bit of his frustrations out, he's showing his dominance, and the light was nice, and, his body position and his facial expression, you can still see it, what he's doing. Those are just such moments to be grateful for. Many people don't spend time doing that. You have to have, a love for getting to watch them and observe them. And it's so great that we have spaces where we can go to be able to do that. So I think in some ways, I've come to really appreciate all those little things that are different and unique that I can see and get to capture. That was a really great morning with a lot of bucks running around, and he was just kind of standing back, and I had some great portrait shots of him, and then when he started to get after the bush, I thought, oh, this is great. Took a lot of shots of that. And so those are just some of those moments that I feel like I get to reflect back on and think to myself, I have gotten to see and experience some really amazing things with wildlife.
You had told me a story about a global entry interview that you did where they asked you, what do you do with all these images? And I'll let you tell the story, but it sure made me think about probably some of the same things that you thought about. So tell us that story, because it kind of follows up on what you're talking about there, where you just get to shoot and shoot and shoot.
Yeah.
Tell that story.
It's so hilarious because I still think about my global entry interview to this day. I signed up for global entry. It's just a faster way to move, when you're traveling and you have to have the interview. And so I had the interview date and it's all set up. And so I go to the Denver International Airport, and the gentleman is interviewing me, asking me all sorts of questions. And he asks, like, why are you interested in global entry? What is it that you need it for? And so I told him that I traveled, to Norway, and I'm going to Africa and Brazil, and I'm going on these photography trips, and, what are you going to be photographing? I tell him. And before he asked me, what do you do with all these images? He asked me, well, who sponsors you for all these trips? And I'm sure he was looking for some really grand answer, like, National Geographic or, something like that. And I kind of paused and I was like, my husband? He immediately starts laughing, and he was like, oh, that's a good husband, And then he says, well, but what do you do with all of these images? And so, I said to him, I sell a few here and there, and I share some with people on social media, and just kind of a basic answer. But when I left, I was like, wow, like that is a true and serious question. What do I do with all of these images? I have like 14,000 images that I took in Alaska. And it's so embarrassing and kind of sad to admit that I have edited maybe 100, maybe. And I have so many images, and some of them I haven't even touched, and they're still like, I should get to them. What do I do with all of these images? I have all these grand ideas sometimes in my mind, with Africa. I want to make a beautiful coffee table book of all of my images, and, but I took 20,000 images in Africa.
It's still just a fraction. Even if you do have books upon books upon books, it's still just a fraction, right?
Yeah. So man, I have like left that interview, and to this day I think to myself, what do I do with all of these images? And so I've started thinking of, like that helped me. It did prompt me to make a website. It did help me get a little more organized. I've moved my computer after I took all of those raw pictures. Well, it held all of my raw pictures from Africa, but when I went to Brazil and it came back with 9,000 more, my computer was like, no. So I've moved like most everything off onto 2 hard drives, and just a backup and a backup, and I'm trying to become more organized and when I go through the editing process, I try to title all of my images. That way, if I go back and I do create like maybe a coffee table book or something, like my thought process is already there. And his question was a great question because it kind of prompted me to like, man, what do I do with all of these images?
And
And I'd love to know like how other photographers feel about that.
it is overwhelming. I just shared recently an elk image from a few years ago that for whatever rabbit hole I went down the other day, I just started looking through some images and I'm like, man, there was just a whole pile of stuff that I probably glanced through while I was importing, but went to the one epic shot and was editing on those. And I went back and I was just like, man, like there's so many good ones. I try to have that first call, like at the end of the day or whatever it is through the import, that's just where you're just flagging some of those that stand out and then try to go back in. But I'm like you, and I'm sure most photographers that do what we do would say the same. Like you're going to end up with terabytes of images that are probably just going to live on a hard drive, unfortunately. And for most of the world, you could pluck any one of those and they would cherish it and call it amazing. And, I think that's kind of testament to the blessing of what we do and the places that we've been able to go is that, I was photographing moose here and I was doing this in Africa and it was this, these elk here or all of the places. It's like, this really has been, a blessing to be able to travel all over and do this. So I certainly don't have the solution for you or for anybody else, but save them all. And I, like I said, I enjoy going back once in a while, and I'm going to go back 4 years ago and look at that trip and what came of it and what were some of the stories that went through my mind and have I improved since then, or how do I do things differently now? I think that's maybe even a good measuring stick for some of the older stuff, is to keep it to be able to go back.
That's very true. I look at some of when, I started in 2019 basically photographing wildlife. And I look back, first of all, I've upgraded my gear. I've learned, obviously, you can make it work with what you have, but gear can really elevate your game. And I've also, like, over that time, really learned how I like to photograph animals. I do a much better job with, like, my composition or, just in general, how I photograph them. And I look back on some of the moments that I had, like some of the great, great moments, and I'll think to myself, like, man, I wish I had my gear in that moment, or I wish I had the insight that I have now in that moment, because I could have maybe done that, way better.
Yeah.
But I did just the other day, I have a project coming up and I needed to make some prints. So I went in my hard drive and I found photos from the Sandwash Basin with the wild horses, and which I had barely touched as far as editing. And I edited like 10 of those and sent a couple off for prints, and they came back. And that was with my older gear, but I was like, man, these are really good. So like you said, you can find some gems in there,
For sure. Have you ever had a moment where that sticks out in I know you have, because we all have, that sticks out in your mind where you missed something epic or something that you just were like, oh, I wish I would have been ready, or I wish I would have had, a different lens or something different? Can you think of something specific that a time that might happen?
Yeah. So I sadly, it's happened often. When I was in Alaska, some of the guys were talking about getting like a motion blur shot, and they were like, oh, you should try it. And so I was like, okay, I'll try it, so I changed all my settings. And one of these shots that I had been wanting and waiting for is this bear running right at me, grabbing a fish, and in this moment, he ran right at me and the fish kind of flopped, and he's doing it with his claws and there's water, and he grabs it with his mouth, and my settings were for like this motion blur.
You're shooting like a 30th of a second or something, right?
So they're horrible. And I just kind of sat there in silence like, well, I blew it. And they were like, what do you mean? He was like right there, right in front of you. And I was like, yeah, well, I had some other idea in mind and I was following a bear over here, but this bear came from over here.
Isn't that the total just antithesis of what you used to do with portraits and people versus what is happening now with wildlife, where everything was scripted to a T, turn your head just a little bit more, chin down just a little, putting the light, all of the things. And now It's like you just better cross your fingers and hope that you're
Yeah.
in the right place, pointing the right direction with the right gear and the right settings, and you see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah. So now I tease that I have to go back and photograph brown bears in Alaska because I have to get that shot.
Yeah, love it, love it. Your brown bear stuff up there, was and it is incredible. I think the photo, I'll pull it up on the screen, though I don't have it with me right now. The shot of the mama bear with the cub up on her back. I've heard you tell the story many times on other podcasts and stuff about the beauty of what was happening there with the little bear standing on mama's back, but also the struggle and the things that you were going through personally at the time. And again, that was a moment that those stories, though the photo is absolutely incredible to anybody that would look at it, to hear your accompanying story of kind of what you were going through at the time makes it even that more meaningful. Tell us just real briefly what that photo meant to you.
Man, I think that photo will just forever be, ingrained. Always, I'm going to always carry that moment with me. It's a moment where I actually just pulled the camera down because I was so excited to be seeing what I was seeing, and I had all these thoughts and all these emotions going on, and it was like I felt this overwhelming sense of like, put your camera down, look and observe for a moment. And I talk about how I felt like that moment was really given to me, and there was so much more meaning for me in particular than maybe the person who was sitting next to me. It was such a great, kind of a realization that I'm in this really big landscape. And these animals depend on, this cub, she's depending on something bigger and greater than her to help her maneuver through the world. And what I was struggling with was kind of like in the same moment, my thought process was like, I'm struggling with depending on something that's greater than me, trusting on something that's greater than me to get me through what I'm experiencing, and to trust that there's been a plan all along and that everything will work out for good. But again, it was just this moment where that peace came over to me that said, just look and see. And I had that calmness. I observed, and then I was like, okay, I can capture this. Because in the beginning, I was like, oh my God, I want to blow this. Like, my mind is just racing, and so that was, it'll be a forever moment carried with me. And now anytime I feel like I get to witness animals on their mom's back, it's just kind of like another, wink, like, remember what I told you,
The God wink, yeah. Yeah, it's like I said, I've heard you tell that story, and I love that it was just such a moment of the convergence of so many things with your faith and with struggles and what God had happening in front of you, to be able to inspire you in that moment. But I would assume like inspire you going forward with this, and like, how can I, thank you God for this incredible thing that I just got to experience, and the healing that it gave you and the inspiration that it gave you, but really like moving forward, like you're saying, you're constantly like seeking out those moments of just being in awe of creation and what God has put in front of you.
hmm Yeah, I feel like faith has really become kind of a foundation now of my photography, you know, maybe since that encounter. I've come to realize that for me, my photography really isn't just about capturing wildlife. It's about capturing all the details that I see God in. And now I feel like every adventure or every outing has become an opportunity to really get to experience and see firsthand, God's handiwork and all those details. I get to see his power and his artistry. And through that, I truly get to feel or see his presence in creation. And it's given me such a gratitude. And in return, with that gratitude, it gives me such a drive to want to share that beauty of the landscape and the animal with others so that they might see his glory as well.
I think I struggle with that in that from a selfish standpoint, when I'm doing what I do, I am experiencing just immense joy. And, again, kind of back to that, like, why are we doing what we do? Is it for the Instagram? Is it for social media? Is it for a client? Is it for the number of images that would never really get touched? All for what? I feel selfish in that I've just been blessed with being around the world and seeing incredible, beautiful things in God's creation. And I feel selfish because it's like, so what are you doing with it? Like, what are you doing about it? You know, we're called to share that testimony of those things and to, you know, preach the gospel and if necessary, use words. But like, how do you feel like you can take a faith that is so important to you and kind of marry it with and weave it into the things that you are so passionate about with photography? Do you have a solution for that yet? Have you figured that out?
So we were talking about what do we do with all of these images? Why are we doing it? For one, I know we're all doing it because we do get so much joy out of it. You know, like sometimes when you capture an image the way you want, or just seeing it and capturing it, that alone, just the act of that brings us joy. But I do think, like, you know, like I was saying, when I get to see God in all those details, and it just fuels me with like a deeper connection and a deeper renewal, because everybody connects with nature, right? Everyone does, regardless of their faith. It's a place where they go to disconnect from the world, to find some peace, to find some rest. And I think that for me, I don't necessarily, I would like to present God's glory in a way that would honor him, but honor how I see it. To me, it's all about he is the creator and this is his creation and he's here and you can find him here. You know, I know that people can share the gospel in a lot of other ways. That to me is how I'm approaching it now. It's a tricky, you know, you can, and personal testimony is always a great way to share it as well. On social media, I think I have struggled in some ways on how to really touch on, like, do I share my personal information or my testimony? I don't mind doing it through podcasts, but on every post, do I need to write, you know, a bunch of personal information, or do I need to find, you know, scripture that tells people that they need to, you know, seek God, you know? But I feel like how I feel God's presence and I get to be in the moment with God's presence is when I am out seeing all the beauty he created. And he created me, and I can find my worth there doing something that brings me joy.
Yeah. You know, does he not care for the birds of the air and how much more he cares for us? And it's like, sometimes I catch that perspective being put on things. And again, it might just be me and my camera, you know, sitting on a log, but finding the joy in just being in that. It's one of the things that I love most about, you know, what we get to do. And yeah, there's times that I'm out on an assignment and you have these things that you need to do for a client or capture these things. But I think that's why I've found so much joy in being able to spend time in creation and just kind of wandering and capturing. And if the photo ever makes it to anywhere where anybody else is going to see it, great. And if not, it's something that, you know, I can look at or recall and just feel, you know, immense joy with. That joy, I'm going to segue this because you've talked a couple times about your trip to Africa. And I think Africa has been a place that I have experienced that probably as much as any place, you know, in my life, is the number of times that I've been blessed to go to Africa. But every time I'm there, I think I'm humbled with joy being distilled to its finest, to its most pure form in the people that have been able to interact with there and develop relationships with there, and then being able to kind of marry that with seeing creation in a totally different place. Tell us a little bit about just your trip to Africa and all of the just amazing things that Africa is. What was it for you?
I don't know if it's just one thing. Africa is magical. And of course, I mean, I was in a really small part of Africa, you know, didn't even get to, you know, explore, you know, really just a very small circle in Africa. But I would say first and foremost, the people who work there, who live and work there, man, I came back and I just said, like, oh my gosh, they're the most gracious and joyful people. They were so wonderful. I loved interacting with them. I loved talking to them. And, you know, I was on a trip with a bunch of guys and I was the only girl, and I have a fairly short name. So every morning I was the only one that got a good morning, Amy. You know, I have an easy name to remember. There's a bunch of other guys that get confused, you know, but I would like to think it's because I was special. But they were so kind and so gracious, and they want you to experience Africa in the best way possible. And so on top of that, you get to experience the culture, like the food was wonderful, and how they do the safaris and the information they tell you and the stories they like to share. And I loved every moment of that. I loved, any time that we got to experience something out of, just then our standard dinner, if we got to do a boma or, like something like that. It's just when you get to travel, you have that honor of seeing somebody else's culture and getting to interact with the people who live there. And it's a full circle thing because all of that helped complement all of the amazing wildlife. I mean, this was stuff you only see in zoos or on documentaries. I hadn't been before, so I'm just like at every turn, I'm just like, oh, yes, and I'm there with maybe a few people who have already been. So I think we have to stop for everything, and I'm excited about everything. And there's so many different, you can be in one spot and 30 minutes later drive down the road and it looks completely different than where you were, and you have a different animal in a different setting. And sunrise and sunset, I mean, everything in Africa was magical. It was so great.
It's
My
those
lodging was
animals that,
great.
yeah, we either saw in zoos or you read about them when you were a little kid in books. And I just can't, until you've experienced it firsthand, where there's a elephant standing right next to you, or a giraffe walks across right in front of you, or there's a lion, all of those things. It's mind blowing. But then to see, kind of back to the creation thing, and like how uniquely different,
Yeah,
all of
for
these
sure.
animals are, and all of these critters. And I think we probably, we don't get burned out on it, but we see elk and we see deer and we see owls and we see these things, and they're great. But then to see those things that were of storybook legend and they're happening in front of you, and God created that giraffe with that long neck and that crazy pattern, and they're eating off the top of the trees. It really is an amazing thing.
Yeah, for sure. I think like too, like one thing I didn't expect is where we were in Kruger, there was mopani trees. And so I got like images of elephants and lions with like fall colors. And I mean, I was so excited about that. I thought that was, one minute you can be photographing elephants and the next minute you're seeing hippos and crocodiles. And like you said, I mean, all of that was stuff of storybook. And here I am. I'm here in the middle of it and I get to seeing it all. But I do think like still, I don't think that would get old. Because there's different parts of Africa to go to, so it's still high on my list. Like it's another place I would go back because I'm sure that a new place would be just as magical and just as exciting because it's a really big place with lots to see.
For sure. My first trip there was with Simba Ministry that our family has worked with over the past 8 or 9 years, and just the kind of talking about the people and the culture and how proud they are and how they love having you there, and then at the same time being humbled to see that these folks literally have nothing, and we come there kind of with everything, if you will, whether we have it with us or it's back home. And we live this life here in America where we're just constantly chasing joy through the next thing that we can buy, or the next experience, or the next all of these things. We're just like desperately trying to find this joy that I found that these people in Africa have. They've got nothing, but they have what we are like so desperately chasing after. And I think that was probably, paired with the incredible parts of creation that I got to see, I think that was probably the most impactful thing, not only the first time, but in subsequent trips, that I come away feeling just really humbled in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree.
What?
There
Go
were
ahead.
a few of the women, they reach out to you and give you a hug. You don't get that kind of hospitality here, but they're so kind and so gracious and like you said, just joyful. They seem to have a joy. And it
Yeah,
exudes, it kind of melts onto you. You're just like.
for sure. Another image kind of in the wild wildlife that you've captured, I'm assuming this picture that I want to pull up is from, it's maybe a jaguar in Brazil. Am I right?
Correct.
if you can just tell a little bit about what was happening with this. The Jaguar's on my list. I've never seen one, never captured one, but your images are incredible. Tell us about this.
I think what I love most about this is we saw we saw plenty of jaguars, and we saw plenty of jaguars in different scenarios, and we did have a couple of amazing and beautiful opportunities with a female jaguar perched in a tree really close. I think what I love most about this one, though, is if you didn't see jaguars very often and you just, like you're searching for them through this vast, jungle terrain, you catch like just the flash of their orange in the green foliage. That happened one morning as we were driving in a boat, and I saw a flash of orange, and I'm like, there's a jaguar, so we turn around and the jaguar is there, and the color against the green is so striking. It's just, imagine how exciting it would be if you were looking for jaguars and all you saw was that flash, So this image, I think I love just like for so many reasons, but if I hadn't have had the honor and the privilege of spending so much time with them and getting to see them walk along the bank or, be laying, resting, if I had just seen that flash of orange with that green, it would have been, think about how exciting that would be, So I think that's why I love that image.
What, tell me more about like the behavior. That was kind of the intrigue that I felt like when I first looked at this was it sort of had that like kind of jaguar vibe to it. Like,
Yeah.
it's kind of hiding in the tree and like stalking, What was I think a lot of what we do, we become, kind of hobby biologists to a certain extent with, you try to understand the animals that we are photographing and what are they doing and why are they doing it and what are they going to do? What were some of the behaviors of, this particular jaguar here that seemingly looked like it was kind of hiding but sort of wanted to be seen? What was it all like?
This one really was truly just sort of resting. It was resting up on a high, riverbank. I believe that there was two siblings, like, older siblings, and their mother was with them. And I'm pretty sure this shot, they kind of meld together sometimes. I'm pretty sure this shot, though, there were both siblings just resting on the bank. And we were really focused on the one that you could predominantly see by the tree, and then it was like there's another one, and it was like had been there the whole time, and it was like, so not all of the shots were great, but like I just had like a moment where it like really showed itself through the foliage, and I thought that's Jungle Book right there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I know you get asked this all the time too, and now I'm going to be the novice that's going to ask you, like, how far away were you? Like, that's a question. Like, but like, what kind of proximity were you in with this particular jaguar?
Oh gosh, this particular jaguar, we're obviously in the river, and we're, maybe as close to the bank as you can get, and then it banks up, and then there's like, like a ledge. So, we're close, but we're not close. When we were with like the jaguar who's perched in a tree, I felt like we were much closer to her because she's in a tree and we're on the boats, and so she's kind of above us. And I thought, like there were times I thought if she really wanted to, she could probably just like, leap maybe into a few of these boats, but we were never, I was closer to animals in Africa perhaps than I truly was in Brazil. But when I was in Brazil, I mostly used just my 400 without an extender. When we went and did some of this excursions on land, I think I might have used my extender on some of those things, but my 400 was, capable of doing a great job. Some of the portraits, like there was a jaguar that walked toward us. We were positioned in our boat and she walked toward us. And so some of my shots, I'm like, oh, it's getting a little close, but then she went up because I thought if she keeps walking, it's going to be just full frame.
Hopefully you weren't trying to do your motion blur photo at that point, like you did with the bear.
Oh man, I never try that again in an important scenario, okay? Lesson learned. I'm in a scenario I've never been in before. I have an idea of something I want to see. Let's try that with a bird or something,
Something where, exactly. I was going to ask you, and I'm going to assume that I know the answer. Maybe you just mentioned it, but what would you say your go-to favorite lens is?
Oh, for sure, my 400. I mean, I love that lens. And I don't have a ton of other lenses, but anytime I switch and I put on a different lens, I'm like, I don't like that lens, you know. And I am learning. I love that 2.8. I mean, I talk about it. I do love that 2.8, but I am learning. You know, there are times that I'll just forget and I'm just shooting on, 2.8, and I might miss the back of some antlers, or maybe the legs aren't as sharp. And so those are things I'm working out with myself. I'm like, well, what do I like in my photo? Like, if I was maybe working for somebody else and they were like, it has to be all crisp, then I would force myself to use a different aperture. But that 400 is such a great lens. And
Yeah,
when you pull it up and you see something through it, you're like, ooh, that's beautiful.
for sure. Though I would say I have a particular 300 2.8 that I got from one of my favorite photographers from Colorado a few years ago that pairs well with the 400. A lot of the places that I will shoot whitetails in timber, that 300 2.8 that you sold me a few years back is still one of my favorites. So
That's a great lens, right?
it is
That's a
heavy,
great
but great.
lens.
Yeah.
Yes. Well,
You,
that
you,
selling that helps me buy my 400, so
Perfect. Perfect. Went to a good cause.
it
You
sure
were
did.
just talking about you're floating down the river and jaguars in trees and on banks above you and all of those things. I can just picture it in my mind. But have you ever found yourself in a photography related, like kind of harrowing or epic experience where you would tell a story that would make the hair on the back of your neck stand up?
I don't know if this one will count, but this is an experience that I quickly learned from. Well, that's probably not true because I'm going to tie some together. So maybe I didn't learn my lesson, okay? So, and I'm really glad that in this experience I was with my husband. First, that I wasn't alone, and second, that I wasn't with a group of other photographers who usually do happen to be men. But there was this beautiful buck that I had been hoping to photograph. He was so beautiful. He was a big, beautiful size, non-typical. He was so beautiful. And I see him and he's headed up this ridge and I'm like, oh. So my husband's driving and I'm like, I'm going up the ridge. So I hike up this ridge and I'm like looking around. I'm like, dang it, I think I lost him. You know how that is, right? And all of a sudden I see him and he sees me and he seems kind of skittish. And I'm like, oh my God, please, of course I'm saying a prayer like, please, Lord, keep him calm, And so instinctively, I think to myself, just sit down, like maybe if you're low, everything will be okay. So I do that. I just sit down and instantly I'm like, no, no. I sat on like a barrel cactus. So I'm just sort of not moving and I'm, taking as many shots as I can. I'm totally uncomfortable. And I'm thinking, like, I think this is bad. Like, this does not feel right. So he kind of moves on, and I have to get up to go and photograph him in a different spot. And I get up, and he's all sorts of nervous, and I get as many shots as I can before he decides, like, enough. I've had enough of you, and he just kind of takes off in a different direction. And I'm obviously not going to run after him because I can feel that I've made a terrible mistake. So I hike down the ridge and I get back to the car and I'm like, babe, I think I sat on a cactus. And he goes to look and he's like, oh my gosh, what were you doing? And I'm like, well, I was photographing the deer and he got really nervous. And so I thought I would just sit down and I didn't really look. So anyways, I have these cactus quills. I mean, you can see hundreds of them on my jeans. And I know that they're all stuck in my skin. So we drive home, which is not safe. I will not recommend, but I have to lay down in the back seat on my belly until we get home and my husband can help me remove the danger from my backside. So when we were in Brazil, I was going to say that I learned my lesson. But I did look where I was going to sit in Brazil. But I don't know if you should sit down in Brazil, is what I've decided that I've learned, because we were photographing capybara, baby capybara, and they were so cute, and I was standing the whole time. But my mistake was that I left my room to just go take a few photographs around the property we were staying in my Birkenstocks and not in my hikers. And I was like squatting in my Birkenstocks was just like really uncomfortable for my feet. So I decided like I'm gonna sit down so I can still keep the lower view because I didn't want to stand and I had already been squatting and standing. So I look at the tree. It's a tree, like a tree stump that's kind of grown out, the root. And I'm like, oh, there's nothing on it. So I sit down, I'm photographing, I'm taking all these great photos. And then when we stand up, I'm with a couple of other photographers. When we stand up to leave, I'm like, oh, and I keep, touching my backside. And Carla's, like, what's going on? I'm like, I think I've got ants in my pants. And sure enough, I don't know, ended up with a bunch of bites and stings on my backside. But
You're going to have a different sit down story on every continent eventually. This is,
right? Well, you can't get out of the car really in Africa, so that didn't,
Right.
That didn't really happen in Africa. But,
right. My gosh.
and in
Crazy.
Norway, it's just snow, so.
So you're mentioning kind of doing the beautiful, wonderful name drop of a few places. Like what you've been to Norway, to Brazil, to Africa, to Alaska. You just took some beautiful photos down in Sonora, Mexico here recently that you've posted. Talk a whole lot about, but just a whole series of rams that were just in the most magical morning light. What's on the list? I think I heard you say that you were going to the Galapagos. What are some other like trips coming up or bucket list trips that you've got?
So the Galapagos is going to be it's not just a photography designated trip, it's a family trip. So they'll be as patient with me as they possibly can while I'm, photographing away. But I have no doubt that I'm going to see some amazing things and photograph some amazing things there. And another trip that I think I really like to make it happen is to go to India and photograph tigers. There's more in India than just tigers, though, too. I mean, they have wolves and bears and all sorts of beautiful birds. And I mean, there's much to photograph there. And India is not a place that I really thought I would travel to, but I'm really considering making that a trip that I want to take. High on my list, though, too, is Dall sheep. And muskox. Those are two animals that have been on my list for quite some time, and I really would like to make those trips happen in the next couple of years. Sheep in general, after photographing the desert sheep in Mexico, and I've photographed bighorns, although I'd like to find some really nice bighorns. I've photographed a few, but after photographing in Mexico with the desert bighorns, I thought, man, I have got to make Dall sheep happen. That's high on my list, and I want to see the landscape where they live.
You don't want to sit down up there too often, though.
I might just slide off the.
Yeah, that would be more harrowing than just cactuses and stuff.
There goes Amy.
There's no cactus. There's no ants. There's just I might slide off the cliffs.
Yeah. Well, don't worry. I don't think I would do that too close to the edge.
Yeah. Do you have kind of as we kind of approach landing the plane here at some point? Do you go into these trips with images in mind or experiences in mind that I really would love to get this shot or that shot? Or do you just say, hey, God, let it unfold in front of me and we'll see what we get?
So I do think I learned a little bit about that. After I went to Alaska, then I went to Norway to photograph polar bears. So in my mind, I had really built up like an expectation of photographing polar bears. In Alaska, you can photograph from the beginning of the day to the days are longer. You can photograph all day long. You're getting a variety of behavior and landscapes and scenarios, and it's action-packed, really. And Norway was it was much slower paced in terms of polar bear action, and there was never, they're not running through the river and catching fish like it was in Alaska. So as far as action-packed, I did not get to experience that. And photographing too, in Norway, they don't have any, trees or bushes. It's all snow and all the animals are white. And I really struggled more on that trip with capturing. And I think in some ways it's because maybe I had built something up in my mind that wasn't really panning out. So after that trip, and I had a great time on that trip, and I never was discouraged. I am the person that can sit back and be like, man, look how gorgeous it is here, even if I'm not taking 1,000 photos but it helped me like moving forward when I go to other places. I will never set an expectation for myself that I have to see something or have to capture something. What I have been given is what I've been given. Now, I might, in my mind, think to myself, it would be great if, or I would love it if, like those kinds of things, just so that I have some ideas in my mind when something does maybe play out like that. But I really try to go into it to be really open. I feel like, granted, if people are traveling for work, like it's work for them because they're hoping to make a publication or make money off of what they're doing, they probably do put more pressure on themselves. Like, well, I have to do this. I've got to capture this. I want this to capture out the way I want it to. But oftentimes I've seen people get really disgruntled or discouraged, even if it's just a day photographing deer or elk, that, oh, it's a waste of time, or that was boring, there's nothing good, because they've placed all these expectations, or they have to have it this way, or they want it that way. But that just, I don't ever want to get like that again. Would take away from the joy of what I'm doing and the gratitude that I'm even out there getting to do it in the first place.
Yeah.
So
That's awesome. It's a great perspective. And I know that I've personally felt the pressure sometimes where there's certain things that you have to get, you
yeah.
really, really want to get because it's going to please a client or whatever. But I think the times that are the truly most joyful are the ones where you just, yeah, you do take it in. You don't
Hmm.
put the camera down if you have to, and just be able to truly enjoy and take in all of what's around you is really awesome.
Yeah, yeah. And obviously, I have that privilege. If I wanted to pursue where I was trying to do something specific, then I would probably have those expectations in my mind or something like that. But at the moment, no.
I mentioned it at the beginning. Adventure.amy on Instagram has been kind of your go-to place to find you, but tell us a little bit about your website that you just kind of got started and kicked off, and kind of how that went and where we can find you on the world wide webs and all of that good stuff.
For so long have just procrastinated creating a website. It seems like a really overwhelming and daunting task to me, and there's so many different services out there, and some you can pay for, some you can't, and I didn't know how to put it together, what direction I wanted to go, but I finally just said, okay, let me practice. In my mind, I was like, let me practice with something first without paying for it. So I went through Pixieset and I made a website, and I actually enjoyed the process, and it was a little easier than I thought it might be. And I actually really do love the finished product now.
We'll put a link to it here, and I'm anxious to go check it out myself. You told me a little about it, and it's a place that you can go and share not only the beautiful images that you take, but a little bit about your life and your faith and kind of what got you to where you are now. So I appreciate you being able to share that with us. And this is kind of just been a great visit. I was thinking about it kind of in advance of us chatting today, and just how blessed I am with relationships in this industry. We've got sort of this community of photographers that we kind of all sort of speak the same language. We enjoy the same things. We technically do a lot of the same stuff, but I think Instagram, for all of the things that you can say about it that are bad, has been an amazing venue for people to cross paths and build relationships. And you being one of them, that we haven't had the enjoyment of shooting together in person in the field, but I feel like I know you. And there's been so many others that I've kind of had that same experience with, that I just find a lot of joy in. And I just look forward to the day where we all get a chance to experience these things together. And so the relationships in this that Instagram has helped to forge, I just really, truly cherish and value those. And appreciate you for who you are, what you do, the beautiful stuff that you do, but also just the chance that we've been able to become friends through a silly app on our phone.
Man, I couldn't agree with that more. That's so true. Predominantly, I feel like Instagram has connected me with like some amazing and incredible people, whether our paths have crossed or not. A place where I know that if I needed to reach out to some of these people, I could, no matter where they're at or where I'm at. It's a great thing.
Yeah, I just that's been the thing as I thought about my career and where I'm going and where what the future looks like. It's always just been about relationships, and I'm really grateful that God has put so many people in my life, whether it be crossing paths at a 90-degree intersection of life, or if it's been an on-ramp onto a road that has gone for a long time, finding people that believe this, the same things and enjoy the same things is truly just one of life's blessings. So I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing stories again that you've already shared with other people, but that I love to listen to and hear and be able to share those conversations with you. And can't thank you enough for coming on.
Thank you for having me. I actually really enjoyed talking with you, and I think that we better change the fact that we haven't shot together in person.
For sure. I think there's probably a lot of cool places that we could end up, converging and meeting and shooting and not sitting on the ground, maybe just having to crouch
Yeah.
down and get low angle stuff. But thanks again for coming on. Adventure.amy on Instagram is where you can find her. We'll put her new website through Pixieset. We'll put the link on. But thank the rest of you for coming on and joining and listening and watching and experiencing a little bit of the stories that come out of some just incredible photos that people like Amy Harris takes. So thanks for joining us today.